"What are you waiting for, Sergeant? Salute me now." That's what the American lieutenant colonel demanded in front of the entire palace, but the royal guard's response, it didn't just silence the officer, it left the whole crowd stunned and taught a lesson in military discipline no one saw coming. Want to know what really happened? First, hit that subscribe button and comment below where you're watching from. That being said, let's get into it. The gleaming black motorcade swept through the palace gates with practiced precision, coming to a smooth stop near the visitors' entrance of Buckingham Palace. A light morning mist hung in the air, softening the edges of the historic stonework while amplifying the vibrant colors of the meticulously maintained gardens. The palace grounds bustled with the usual mixture of tourists and official visitors, their excited murmurs creating a constant backdrop against which the day's events would unfold. The vehicles bore diplomatic flags, indicating the arrival of the American military delegation for the annual NATO Strategic Leadership Summit. Curious, onlookers paused to observe the formal arrival, many raising phones to capture the moment. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hayes of the United States Marine Corps stepped out, adjusting his immaculate uniform with military precision. Each medal and ribbon told the story of a distinguished career spanning multiple combat zones. His expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes betrayed a hint of dismissive assessment as he surveyed the palace grounds, taking in the ceremonial pageantry with barely concealed impatience. All this pomp for what's essentially a glorified meeting. He remarked to Major Davis beside him, "We could have hosted this at the Pentagon and saved everyone the theatrical entrance." Major Davis gave a non-committal nod, his attention already drawn to the iconic figure standing at attention nearby. Royal Guard in full ceremonial regalia, scarlet tunic, brilliant against the backdrop of weathered palace. STONEWORK. Sergeant William Barrett stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed forward in the disciplined thousand-yard stare perfected through years of service. Hayes's gaze followed Davis's, lingering on Barrett with undisguised skepticism. Without warning, he veered from the group, breaking the carefully choreographed arrival protocol to approach the guard. He circled Barrett slowly, examining him as one might inspect military equipment. Incredible detail on the uniform. He commented to no one in particular, his tone somewhere between grudging admiration and mockery, "Though I wonder how practical that bearskin hat would be in an actual combat zone." "Lieutenant Colonel," came a polite but firm voice, Edward Fleming, the palace tour. The coordinator approached with a diplomatic smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "If you'd kindly rejoin your group, we have a rather precisely timed schedule to maintain." As the delegation resumed their walk through the palace grounds, Hayes remained distracted. His attention kept drifting to the royal guards stationed at various posts. "Tell me," Hayes interrupted, cutting off Fleming mid-sentence just as he began explaining the history of the palace gardens. "These guards, they're just ceremonial, right, for the tourists." Before Fleming could respond, Hayes turned to his fellow Americans. "It's like having mannequins in uniform. Back home, we put our soldiers to actual use." Colonel Wilson, the senior American officer, frowned slightly. "The Royal Guards are an operational battalion of the British Army, Jackson. They rotate between ceremonial duties and regular deployments." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Seems inefficient. Combat-trained personnel standing like statues." "In the Corps, we optimize utility." Across the garden, Captain Richard Wells of the Royal Guard Command had already noticed Hayes gesturing toward Barrett. Wells had spent 7 years overseeing Royal Guard duties and had a keen eye for potential incidents before they escalated. What Hayes didn't know was that Sergeant William Barrett had been handpicked for this assignment due to his exceptional discipline and judgment. Just 3 months earlier, Barrett had completed his 4th combat deployment. During a classified joint operation, his unit had extracted high-value intelligence assets under sustained enemy fire. That mission earned him the Military Cross for valor, though much of the operation remained classified. His personnel file included commendations from American Special Forces commanders who described Barrett as unflappable under extreme pressure and exhibiting extraordinary discipline in chaotic conditions. It was precisely those qualities that made Barrett a perfect fit for Royal Guard duty. The mental discipline required for ceremonial performance aligned seamlessly with the control needed in a battlefield. "I served alongside the Queen's Guard in Helmand Province," offered Major Hale, a British military attaché accompanying the delegation. "Some of the finest soldiers I've encountered." Hayes gave Hale a skeptical look. "No disrespect, Major, but there's a difference between theatrical performance and actual combat readiness. These palace mannequins might look the part, but modern warfare demands constant training and tactical flexibility, not standing still for hours. We'll take a brief moment here to admire the Western facade before continuing," Fleming interjected, trying to bring the group back on track. Continuing to the changing of the guard ceremony, Fleming announced to the delegation as the group began to spread out, taking photographs. Hayes seized the opportunity to slip away with practiced ease. He moved with purpose across the palace grounds, heading straight for Sergeant Barrett's position. He stopped directly in Barrett's line of sight, deliberately stepping into the guard's fixed gaze. "Impressive discipline," Hayes said, though his tone made it clear he didn't mean it as a compliment. though I wonder what tactical value standing still offers while a potential threat evaluates your position. A small group of tourists nearby began to notice the strange interaction. Most kept a respectful distance from the guards, but Hayes closed in now within arm's reach. He scrutinized Barrett with the sharp, critical eye of a drill instructor, looking for flaws. In the Corps, we train Marines to react to threats, not ignore them, he added, slowly circling the immobile Barrett. This ceremonial rigidity might look great on postcards, but military effectiveness is about adaptability. Don't you agree? Barrett didn't flinch. No reaction, no acknowledgement. Lieutenant Colonel Major Davis called out, having noticed Hayes missing from the group. The delegation is moving on. Hayes waved him off, still focused on Barrett. Just having a professional exchange with our British counterpart, he replied, the word professional dripping with sarcasm. Davis eventually coaxed Hayes away, but not before the lieutenant colonel locked eyes with Barrett. We'll continue this discussion later, Sergeant, he said, incorrectly reading the rank on Barrett's uniform. I'm curious to see how this ceremonial training translates to actual military engagement. The group had made it about halfway through their tour when Hayes broke away again, this time with such clear intent that even Colonel Wilson's sharp call of Lieutenant Colonel Hayes couldn't slow him. A larger crowd had gathered around the guard post now, mid-morning tourists arriving with cameras and guidebooks. Hayes returned to the same position before Barrett, whose posture and gaze remained flawlessly disciplined. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes announced loudly, his voice projecting with the command of a seasoned officer addressing a formation. You're witnessing an interesting contrast in military philosophies today. He gestured toward Barrett. This represents the British approach, precision over combat readiness, he continued. In my 22 years with the United States Marine Corps, I've led troops through 3 combat deployments, Baghdad, Fallujah, and Helmand Province. Each time, our success depended on adaptability, tactical awareness, and immediate response to shifting threats. He turned directly to Barrett. Tell me, Sergeant, how does standing motionless prepare you for the chaos of modern combat? An elderly man in a blazer adorned with British military medals stepped forward. Young man, you're out of line, he said quietly but firmly. These guardsmen have served in the same combat zones you mentioned. Their ceremonial duty reflects discipline, not deficiency. Hayes turned, assessing the older man with a glance at his medals. With respect, sir, I'm simply pointing out different approaches to military readiness. A soldier who spends hours standing still isn't developing the tactical flexibility that modern warfare demands. He stepped even closer to Barrett, closing the distance that every other visitor respected. You know what impresses me about American forces? Hayes continued, raising his voice. When a Marine is addressed by a superior officer, they respond, they engage, they don't hide behind ceremonial protocol. A woman in the crowd gasped as Hayes moved within inches of Barrett, close enough for his next words to be meant for the guard alone, though the people nearby could still hear. Have you ever actually seen combat, Sergeant? Or did they put you here because you look good in red? Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. Colonel Wilson's voice cut through the tension as he finally stepped away from his diplomatic duties. Rejoined the delegation immediately. But Hayes wasn't finished. As the crowd shifted position to get better views of the changing of the guard ceremony, he seized the opportunity. Unnoticed, he slipped away again, striding with purpose toward Barrett's post. By the time Major Davis realized what had happened, Hayes was already back in Barrett's face. The guard, unmoved, remained statuesque and flinching despite the repeated provocations. Your changing of the guard is quite the performance, Hayes announced, locking eyes with Barrett. Impressive choreography, I'll give you that. But in the Marines we change posts with efficiency, not pageantry. He continued, now raising his voice like a military instructor delivering a lecture. Let me explain something about military protocol. Across NATO forces, there's a universal understanding of the chain of command. Regardless of national customs, military courtesy demands that junior officers acknowledge senior officers. He tapped the insignia on his own chest. Lieutenant Colonel, United States Marine Corps. Combat decorated. 3 deployments. Experience in joint force command operations. His finger jabbed toward Barrett. And you, a sergeant whose main skill is standing still. Hayes began circling Barrett with the measured pace of a drill instructor. Your uniform. It is impressive, Sergeant. Very ... historical. His tone made the word feel like an insult without warning. He reached out and pinched the sleeve of Barrett's scarlet tunic between thumb and forefinger. Well, in combat conditions, this would be a liability. The crowd tensed. Everyone knew the cardinal rule at the palace: never touch the guards. He just touched him. A young American tourist whispered loudly, "You're not supposed to do that." Hayes's hand moved toward Barrett's rifle, fingers brushing the barrel. Ceremonial weapon or actually functional? An audible ripple ran through the crowd at this second blatant violation of protocol. Security personnel began closing in, moving discreetly because of Hayes's military status. Then Hayes stepped directly into Barrett's line of sight, blocking it completely. A third violation. The difference is responsiveness, Hayes continued. A Marine Guard acknowledges senior officers, stays alert, and adapts to the situation. He straightened his posture, assuming the formal bearing of an officer delivering orders. "Guard," he announced, voice booming with command. "I am Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hayes, United States Marine Corps, NATO Joint Command. Military protocol across Allied forces requires junior personnel to render appropriate respect to senior officers. This is a direct order from a lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps. Salute me now." The demand cracked through the air like a rifle shot. For a long moment, Sergeant William Barrett didn't move. His eyes remained locked forward, frozen in the disciplined 1,000-yard stare he had maintained despite every provocation. Then, without warning, his posture shifted with such controlled precision that onlookers later described it as mechanical perfection. Barrett's gloved hand moved with fluid precision as he calmly removed Hayes's fingers from his rifle. "Sir," Barrett said, his voice carrying the clipped, exacting tone of British military protocol, "you are in violation of standing orders regarding interaction with the Queen's Guard. Physical contact with a guard or his equipment constitutes a Category B security infraction." Hayes's expression faltered, shifting from authoritative to stunned, clearly not expecting a response, let alone one delivered with such unapologetic precision. "Furthermore," Barrett continued, locking eyes with Hayes, "while your rank commands appropriate respect within NATO allied forces, Standing Palace Protocol establishes clear guidelines regarding the chain of command while on royal grounds. The Queen's Guard operates under the direct authority of the Crown, not NATO. Command structure," he went on, reciting from memory. "Standing Order 157 specifically addresses interaction with Allied military personnel. Guards will maintain position and bearing regardless of visiting military rank, as their oath is sworn first to the sovereign. My duty is to the Crown first, Lieutenant Colonel. That duty includes maintaining prescribed position, bearing, and protocol regardless of external military authority." His tone remained measured, respectful but unyielding. "This isn't a matter of disrespect toward your rank, sir," Barrett said, "but rather absolute respect for the oath of service I have sworn." With a single smooth motion, Barrett returned his gloved hand to his rifle, resuming his position with flawless discipline. "I must respectfully request you step back to the designated viewing area and refrain from further physical contact with palace guards or their equipment." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, Captain Richard Wells's voice cut through the standoff as he approached with steady steps. "I believe there might be some misunderstanding regarding protocol on palace grounds," he said, offering a crisp nod. "Captain Wells, Guard Commander, I see you've been discussing protocol with Sergeant Barrett," Hayes said sharply. "Your guard broke position to address me." "Indeed, sir," Captain Wells replied evenly. Sergeant Barrett followed Standing Order 157, Paragraph 3. "In the event of physical contact or immediate security concerns, guards are authorized to respond with the minimum necessary communication and action." His tone was neutral, professional, not defensive. "The Queen's Guard operates under a unique command structure. On palace duty," Captain Wells explained as they moved to a more private section of the grounds, "we acknowledge NATO command protocols in joint operations, but here, within these walls, authority falls under the Crown that supersedes standard military chain of command even for visiting officers." Hayes stood stiffly, his jaw clenched, listening. "In 30 years of service across 4 continents," he said sharply, "I've never had a junior officer refuse a direct order from a superior." "That's because Sergeant Barrett wasn't refusing an order," Wells replied calmly. "He was following standing orders that clearly state, on palace grounds, his chain of command flows exclusively through the Crown, not through any visiting military personnel regardless of rank." A few yards away, the elderly British veteran, who had stepped in earlier, was speaking quietly to a group of American tourists. "The Royal Guards aren't just here for ceremony," he explained. "They're active duty soldiers, combat veterans. Barrett, for instance, served with distinction in Afghanistan alongside American forces." Colonel Wilson, having finally located Hayes, approached with a firm voice and visible frustration. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said, tone edged with authority, "the delegation is awaiting your return." The implication: this was no longer a suggestion. Wells addressed both American officers, offering context without condescension. "The guards you see today," he said, "they completed a 6-month combat deployment just 8 weeks ago. Sergeant Barrett was commended for valor during a joint operation with U.S. Special Forces. The same men standing sentry today could be deployed into a combat zone next month." Hayes's expression stayed skeptical. "Different training philosophies," he said flatly. "American forces emphasize tactical flexibility. As do we," Wells responded without missing a beat. "But we see the discipline of ceremonial duty as complementary, not contradictory, to combat readiness. The ability to maintain composure, posture, and bearing under intense public scrutiny prepares a soldier for the pressure of battle just as well." Wilson nodded, intrigued. "Interesting perspective, Captain. We've seen similar results from drill discipline within our own ranks. Hayes shifted, unconvinced. With respect, there's a real difference between drill execution and standing motionless for tourists, is there? Wells asked mildly. Both demand total control, precision under observation, and the ability to put duty above discomfort. Wilson ended the exchange firmly. We need to rejoin our delegation, Lieutenant Colonel. Ridiculous theatrical nonsense, Hayes muttered, as Colonel Wilson firmly escorted him back toward the American delegation, standing around in bright red targets pretending it's military discipline. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, Wilson said, his voice calm but commanding. You've created a diplomatic incident during what was meant to be a routine goodwill visit. They rejoined the American group, several officers eyeing Hayes curiously before pointedly averting their gaze. British inflexibility hasn't changed since colonial times, Hayes remarked to Major Davis, loud enough for nearby officers to hear. They cling to outdated protocols and call it tradition. The other American officers instinctively drifted away, creating subtle distance from Hayes as the tour continued. His isolation became increasingly visible across the grounds. Sergeant Barrett stood motionless, his posture unaffected by the incident. If anything had unsettled him, there was no trace of it. As the American delegation made their way back to the gates where their motorcade waited, a few officers, including Colonel Wilson, gave Barrett a respectful nod, a silent but unmistakable gesture of professional acknowledgement. Hayes, notably, was excluded from that courtesy. They're soldiers, not statues, Hayes muttered defensively as they neared the vehicles. Military effectiveness is about adaptability, not theatrical performance. Interesting perspective, Lieutenant Colonel, came the calm voice of an American general who had remained silent throughout, though I noticed that Sergeant Barrett adapted quite effectively to your challenge. His response was both appropriate and professionally delivered. Hayes's jaw tightened. A rehearsed response to a predictable situation isn't adaptability, sir. It's just following a script. Perhaps, the general replied thoughtfully. But it resolved the situation swiftly, within protocol. Tactical objective achieved with minimum force. That sounds rather effective to me. As the motorcade pulled away from the palace gates, Hayes stared out the window, his expression rigid. The reflection that stared back showed a man still convinced of his correctness despite the silence from everyone around him in the distance. Sergeant Barrett's red uniform stood out against the gray stone, his unwavering stance to the final image as the vehicles disappeared. What does true respect for military tradition look like across international boundaries? This story reminds us that understanding protocol isn't about dominance, it's about respect. And sometimes, the quietest soldier delivers the loudest lesson. Standards can clash when military cultures meet. While Lieutenant Colonel Hayes believed he was enforcing proper military courtesy, he failed to understand that true respect means recognizing different chains of command and honoring distinct jurisdictions. The Queen's Guard stands as a symbol of a unique military tradition where ceremonial precision and battlefield readiness are not opposites, but allies in perfect harmony. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more narratives that explore the deeper meanings behind the Royal Guard's unwavering discipline. Don't forget to click the notification bell, so you're the first to know when our next story goes live. Share this video with someone who values duty, protocol, and mutual respect across cultures and uniforms. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen someone refuse to honor another country's military customs? How should service members navigate cultural differences while working alongside international allies? Check out the videos appearing on your screen right now and join us again tomorrow for another powerful reminder of what true service looks like. That matter, the uniform it wears.